like, I think that, well, I'm just trying to get them all out now.
Is that what, like, now it shows my ass?
That shows my ass.
But it shows a little bit of the wood right there.
Oh, yeah, nice.
Versus it floating above here.
Gotcha.
And it was like, what is it doing?
Yeah, it looks great.
Right.
The wood panels in your apartment just look so good.
Yeah.
It looks so rustic.
All right, so question number 1. Cancel, cut, stop. Cancel, cancel, delete. Cancel, stop.
Control-Alt-Delete. Okay. My name's Alex Miller. My pen name is Clint Rafferty. There's already a famous author named Alex Miller. He's from Australia. Go buy his books. I am a writer, a director, an actor, a storyteller. I wrote my first story when I was in first grade. I printed it out. It was about a book about a duck named Poe. I was very excited about it and handed out copies to all of my classmates. I'm sure none of them remember that. But yeah, I'm a storyteller by heart. That's what I do. I can't get enough of it. What is Delicate Little Things about? I got the idea for this story because I was watching 12 Angry Men. I'd never seen it before, and I was fascinated by the idea of compelling an audience while keeping a number of different cast members in one confined space. I'd never seen that before, and they were able to cause tension, cause drama, cause all this different stuff inside 4 walls. And I went, this is a story that I can tell. I'd never written a novel before. I'd never contemplated writing a novel before. And so I come from screenwriting. And so as an exercise, I knew that I wanted to make it in a novel. I'm not great with structure. I'm not great with kind of building out the story before I dive into it. I truly believe in letting the characters tell the story. So I actually wrote it as a feature film first. One location, a group of characters, and just kind of letting them figure out how they were going to go about this story. And once I had that structure, the feature film ended up being about 88 pages. I used that as my blueprint to turn it into a novel, to allow myself to dive into the depths of the story, into the characters, and all I knew is I wanted to tell a story of a group of young adults forced to make decisions that they wouldn't otherwise make if they weren't under this pressure cooker of one location. And it kind of slowly developed, and they did what they were going to do, and kind of led me to this really fun, interesting, thrilling coming-of-age story. The spark, again, was that 12 Angry Men. But I grew up loving stories like Stand By Me, Lord of the Flies. I'm a huge fan of Ray Bradbury. I loved Fahrenheit 451. I love Michael Crichton. The Sphere was one of my favorite books I ever read. And so they all kind of revolved around that coming of age, discovering your own morality, what's important to you, and kind of telling it under this lens of thriller and suspense and drama. And I'm also fascinated by the fact that we're all human beings. We're all broken. We all are coming from trauma one way or the other, whether it's something that you openly talk about and that you've conquered and that you've figured out how to grow from, or if it's something that you're still struggling with. And so I knew those were the components that I wanted to tell. I wanted young adults dealing with trauma, dealing with their relationships, all while the real story above all of that is a suspenseful thriller, hiding all of these different relationships underneath. That's a funny story. I wrote the script. I spent, again, a month or two writing all these different drafts. And it got to a point where the story was so in my skin that I couldn't think of it any other way than how it was on the page. And so I reached out to some friends and I had them read through it out loud with me. Just so I could hear it, so I could hear different perspectives, so I could hear the way that people were interpreting the characters. And at the end of that read through, 100% of the people involved came to me at the end and they said, this is a story that you need to make. And it was the first time I had ever experienced that kind of overwhelming approval for something that I had written. I don't necessarily think that at that time I had really thought of taking it any further, but people loved it so much that it kind of got stuck under my skin. I couldn't get rid of the story. I kept thinking about it. I kept thinking about the characters, about how to take it, the ending, and it became something that I became obsessed with, and I had to write it to get it out. I'm not sure. I think it was more, I kind of, the age-old story is write what you know. And I had never done that as a practice. I'd always written the scripts that I had written or the short stories or the poetry that I had written had always come from my imagination of a story that I wanted to hear or wanted to see. And I just kind of thought back to my roots and the things that I loved to watch, which was like The Goonies and Stand By Me and those, a group of friends gathering together to discover a mystery or get through some circumstance together. And I wanted to challenge myself to write something that was personal. So I started developing these characters based off people that I grew up with, people I went to middle school, high school, the situations that we had together. The prologue of the book starts with a memory of making cookies with my mom in the kitchen. That's a real story. It really happened. The blender exploded and the cookie dough went all over the ceiling and all over myself, and my mom and I were just laughing together. And so there's pieces that are very, very personal to me that I'd never written that way before. And so I think it kind of started with me getting in touch with my own story and my life and the things that I had experienced and kind of sharing them in a different light. Originally, the title was Unanimous because the original draft of my story kind of centered around the idea that all of the people involved had to agree upon what decision to make. Going back to that realism question, I soon realized that you get any group of people into a room under a very stressful situation, the likelihood that they agree with each other is very slim. So it very quickly became apparent that that title, Unanimous, was not accurate. It didn't fit the story. And so I kind of was going back and forth between what I wanted, and I remembered Rob Reiner changing the story from The Body to Stand By Me, because I think it was Kiefer Sutherland and River Phoenix were playing the song on guitar, or one was teaching the other, or I'm not really sure how it went, but Rob Reiner apparently heard them playing the song and went, I love that song, and he changed the title of the movie to that. And so I was kind of going back and forth and researching a bunch of song titles. I wanted something poetic. I wanted something that sounded hopeful and full of positivity, yet for a story that was so dark and grounded and intense and scary. And so I was talking with Lily, who ended up acting in the movie as well as doing costumes for the film as well. And I was telling her, I want something that kind of encompasses children and the fragility of their morality. And I said, because children are such delicate little things, and I need a title that's going to match that feeling. And she smiled at me and she said, That's your title. You've got it right there. From conception to publish date was probably about 1.5 years. Again, as an exercise, I had never had experience with writing a novel before, so I started as a feature film. I know that format, I know how that works, I know the act breaks, and so I wrote it that way to begin with, and then used that as a foundation to really flush out and go into depth with the story. The script itself, the first draft, took 2 days. It was very fast. After, the 5 or 6 or 7 other drafts that I did, it was probably about a month or 2. And then from that, it was probably another year to 2 to 3 months until it was completely finished. I think it started as a question of how far can peer pressure really take a group of friends? If you're, in this story specifically, you've got nine young adults, 17 to 20 years old, and you're dealing with a very intense subject, children kidnapping. And I wanted to see how far I could push the boundaries of right and wrong when revenge, sticking up for your community, doing what's right in the face of your friends and injustice, how far that could push a group of people to act. And from that, I layered it with different stories of betrayal between friendships, between dealing with trauma from, missing loved ones, from your own kind of self-esteem issues that you deal with as a kid. I remember being young and not really feeling comfortable in my own skin and feeling like I had to do certain things to fit in with my peers and my friend group. And it just kind of developed into this really tight-knit nutshell of different stories of what we all kind of go through growing up under the guise of real intense trauma and difficulty within a community. It starts very nostalgic, very sweet. A lot of the stories come from my personal experiences, memories that I've had. It very quickly goes to a very bitter and sour note, and then the stakes kind of stay high after that. But I do hope that it stirs some memories for people when they read it, and things that they've gone through, and remembering what it was like to be a kid, and everything was so intense and everything was so serious and everything was a life and death situation. And I hope there's a little bit of a bitterness, of a broken heart at the end, realizing that the innocence of youth and the morality of youth can be broken and changed so drastically based off one decision. I think I was worried that if I took the story too far out of the realm of reality, that it wouldn't have the impact that I wanted it to have. Child abduction is very serious. It's a very dark story. I personally do not have any connection with that, any personal feeling or understanding of what that's like. But I wanted to make sure that the stakes for the story were so drastically high that these group of kids, this friendship group, didn't have any other choice but to act in a real way about it. And that was something I struggled with a lot, was every decision that they made, making sure that it ended up feeling real. I didn't want this to seem like it was an easy choice for anyone to make one way or the other without giving away the ending. But it was very important for me that at the end of this story, no one went, I don't believe this isn't realistic, this wouldn't happen. I think the impact needs that realism. I don't think that while I was writing it, that was a conscious decision that I was making. But I had a couple people read it after I was finished. Before I published it, I actually sent it to my editor, Lindsay, and she's great and has a lot of knowledge, is way more experienced than I am. And the ending was something that she brought up quite a bit. I don't necessarily resolve the story in a traditional way where every question is answered, where everything is tied up in a neat little bow. And that was kind of something that she leaned into, and she kind of gave her opinion of, readers of this specific genre, they like tidy answers. They like a complete ending. And her and I went back and forth, and she asked me the question. She said, what do you want to leave the audience feeling at the end of this story? And my answer was, I wanted the consequences of the characters' choices to be such a real guttural punch that it left the audience feeling like they had just witnessed something that could have been, that could have gone a different way, that everyone's innocence could have been saved, but because they went to a line and crossed it, now it's too far gone. And I think that was my unconscious idea of what I wanted to leave the readers with. They were all kind of based on friends that I grew up with, but I think my favorite character was Will. I don't necessarily think he was the hardest to write because I loved him so much, but I think it came with a lot of protection over him because I knew I wanted him to be my moral compass. I knew I wanted him to be the voice of reason, the weakest character on paper and yet the strongest one vocally. And I think that was a very difficult thing for me to do because I really had to thread that needle. And so in that regard, that was very difficult. It was very difficult making sure that I stayed true to who he was and stayed true to that archetype of the kid that isn't understood, that gets made fun of, that gets pushed around, but at the same time has the strength and the courage to stand up for what he thinks is right. Because I started my process of writing this as a script, as a feature, to kind of build out the structure of how I was going to tell the story, I had people, actors that I trusted, kind of look through the characters and read through it and kind of give me their process and their thoughts on it. And a lot of them really changed the characters in the way that I wrote them. And one in particular, there's a character in the book called Dane Ramirez, who I wrote originally as a very cookie-cutter villain, the school bully, the neighborhood bully, who's actually based off a guy who lived in my neighborhood when I was in middle school. And the friend that I had read this character, his name was Danny, and he really came at me with the ending arc of Dane and how he didn't have any growth, how there wasn't any change in him after all of the things that he had experienced in this group. And he kind of gave me some very specific things that he thought were deserved, that were needed in the story, and it completely changed that character. He starts one way, and at the very end you see him break, and you see him broken, and you see him vulnerable, and it's a really beautiful journey that you see him go through, and that was not something that I was expecting when I first started writing him. Because I had never had any experience writing a novel before, I didn't know how to structure, I didn't know how to outline, I didn't know how to build out the chapters. I started it as a feature film script because I know that format. I've done it many times before. And in doing that, I did a table read with some actors. Some that I trusted, some that I had never met before, and some that I did a casting call for. And when I found the actors that I loved and that I thought best represented those characters, I sat down with each and every one of them and really spent time and asked them their thoughts. I said, why do you relate to this character? What don't you relate to? What do you think doesn't work for this character? What do you think does? And they were so generous with their time. The actor that read for Nate, his name's Tyler, he really got vulnerable with me about his upbringing and the things that, if he were to play Nate, what he would do differently, and how he would act and how he would stand. And it was actually his idea to make Nate never swear. It was like one of his core values. He was like being the leader, being that guy that guides everybody. He thought it was very important to keep him pure, or as pure as possible. The guy that read for Charlie, his name was Thomas, and Thomas was based off a guy that I grew up with in middle school. It was someone who was a part of my friend group. But in the novel, the original story, he was kind of such this outlier character. He was just kind of there in the ether with this group. And Thomas really gave a lot of heart to him, and it was actually his idea to make Charlie come in halfway through the story. He said he should be the last one to know. He should be the last one picked. He should be this guy that he's a part of the friend group, but almost reluctantly. No one really wants him to be there. And it really shaped that character completely differently than what I had originally written it. And everybody else who read added something just kind of so beautiful. Grace came to me with a lot of secrets that she thought Izzy would have. Grace was the actress that read for Izzy, and that really ended up making her the strongest character in the entire story. The actor who played Will gave a lot of insight to him, and we spoke a lot. I really think that working with them, because actors view characters in such a drastically different way than a writer does, they kind of live in their skin and make them real, really helped me round out all of those kids. All of the characters started out as people that I grew up with. I lived in Indiana. The story takes place in Fishers, which I have never been to, but I lived in Goshen, Indiana for a few years. My dad's from there. And so the neighborhood itself is very much reminiscent of the neighborhood that I grew up in, and having the basement that was like the friend go-to hangout spot. That was my basement growing up. The neighborhood bully Dane, I had that in my neighborhood. He lived like 4 houses down from me. I remember there was a kid in my neighborhood whose dad was very abusive. There was a kid in my neighborhood whose parents were very absent. They kind of let him do whatever he wanted. And so there's pieces of this all over the story that are very real to what I experienced. Thankfully, I never experienced kidnapping or any of the horrible things that go on, but there's kernels of my life in every page of this. Again, definitely Will. I think he's probably the closest to me. There's definitely some experiences that he goes through in the story that are very personal to me. They come from my story and my life. And I know what it's like to be that kid that, even though it's not the coolest or the most acceptable thing to do, is to stand up for what you think is right or wrong, even when everybody in your friend group, everybody around you is telling you that, you know, you're being this way or that way, or whatever the long list of insults would be that they would give you. But there's such a strength when you can hold your ground and say, no, this is wrong, and I'm not going to be a part of it, even if it means turning away from your friends. So I was very, very protective and made sure that character, his mission and his core value shined through the entire story. I had never written a novel before, so honestly it was very, I'm sure to any professional author looking at what I did, they would think I was insane. It was very chaotic. It was very, I would start a chapter and think that this was going to be the first chapter of the book, and then I would write another chapter and move it to the beginning of the book, and then I'd write another one and move them around. So it was really like each individual story, each individual chapter kind of became its own little story, and then I was moving them around to see how I wanted the story to kind of unfold. So it was an interesting experience. It was, I want to say my first draft was maybe like 150 pages. It was very short. I knew I needed to add more, so it was just kind of an ongoing unfurling of what the story was going to become. It was really fun. I really enjoyed the process of doing it. I don't think so. There was definitely moments where I took a break, where I would step back and I'd let it rest for a second. I think when you're living in a story every single day, and I won't speak for anybody else, I'll speak for myself, but when I get a story in my head, like it becomes obsessive to me. I can't stop thinking about it. I dream about it. I dream about different scenes. I think about different scenarios. I think about people in my life that are similar to the characters. I think about if it was a movie, who would play that character, and it becomes something that gets so ingrained into your DNA that it can be very hard to continue with it. I don't want to say you get bored of it, but it's such a repetitive story in your mind that you kind of lose the spark and the joy of discovery. And so there was definitely times where I had to like put it down and I wouldn't look at it for a couple of weeks or a month maybe, and then I would come back and it was fresh and it was new, and I had lived and experienced some new things, and so I was looking at it in a different perspective. But there was never a moment where I wanted to just throw in the towel and give up. I think the hardest part about writing in general is it's a very vulnerable art form. Much like any art, painting, dancing, acting, music, there's a piece of you in everything that you're creating. I mean, yes, an actor comes to set and they are telling somebody else's story. They are the instrument in which the story is being told, where a painter or a writer, they are the composer, the musician, the instrument. They're every aspect of it. But I think any artist is giving a piece of themselves to the story they're telling, and it's scary because then you share it with people and there's a large possibility that they won't like it, and that can be very intimidating. I am a huge advocate, and I think Stephen King writes this way, of developing your parameters of what your story are and developing your characters and really understanding who they are and then letting them discover the story. So I didn't have an ending in mind when I started the book. I didn't know how it was going to end. I didn't know what they were going to do, but I would write and then find my characters in a situation that I either needed to, one, answer right away, or I needed to go back and rewrite it so I could continue the story on. So I really allowed my characters to kind of tell the story for me and guide me to where they wanted the story to go, which that's my favorite way to write. Probably. I don't think in the typical like cookie cutter, like I felt for this character, I just can't finish this scene. It was probably more along the lines of obsessive, grumpy because I couldn't finish a chapter, or frustrated because I didn't know where to take something, or once a chapter was written and finished, rereading it over and over and over again and seeing if there's any dull point. Was I uninterested in anything? Was there a piece of dialogue that between two characters that didn't feel real? That would probably be how it affected me, of just like that kind of insanity of wanting to figure out how to tell the story. I mean, I think all stories need to be told. I think one of the most difficult things in the world is being a human being. And I'm not saying that there isn't privilege out there and people who definitely have it worse off than I do, and that can be said for everybody. That just goes on and on and on. But being a human being is hard. We have desires, we have wants, we have needs, we have dreams, we have family, loved ones, friends, relationships, jobs, bills. It's a never-ending mountain of things that we carry on our backs every single day. And I think we've been telling stories from the beginning of time for that reason. I think we need to laugh. We need to cry. We need to release. We need to be afraid. We need to see other people's perspectives. I'm so guilty of living my life in my own little bubble and being frustrated about my silly little problems and not really reflecting and taking a macro view of the world and the people around me, and realizing that everybody I pass is dealing with something of their own as well. And I think that's what these stories are for. Whether you relate or not, I think it's very important to get a different grasp of the world and the people around you. My favorite type of storytelling is honest. Movies, short films, plays. I started out as an actor, maybe that's where that comes from, but I can always tell in a story if the response, reaction to any type of situation is outside the norm of how someone would react. So it was very important to me, but also came very natural to me to understand who each individual character was and understand the honest response in which they would have. But it was important for me to hit that and to hit that honesty. And as I've said before, I had many people read it before I published it. I had an editor. I had my sister read it. My sister's a prolific reader, and just kind of like wanted their opinion of, did you see the twist coming? Was the response honest? What did you think of the characters? And thankfully, the people that I had read it were very upfront and honest with me and gave me a lot of critiques and things to think about. It's gonna make me sound insane if I say I don't think I needed to, but yeah, it's not my story. There's pieces of me that are in it, but the experiences that these characters went through is not my experience. It's not my personal story that I'm spilling onto these pages. There's definitely some cathartic things that I went through and was able to confront about my childhood growing up that I didn't think I would experience doing this. The relationships with people, the friendships I've had, the relationship with my family that I've had growing up, I wasn't expecting to have such a mirror held to my face through this. But when it comes to the real heavy trauma of these stories, I was very much thankfully removed from those things. I haven't experienced those, but I was able through these characters to kind of empathetically take a glimpse into them. I don't know if it is. I love my ending. Again, Lindsay, my editor, she suggested maybe adding an epilogue, a flash forward of where the characters are now, which I did not want. I was very adamant about that. I wanted it to end the way it did, with this kind of heartbreak, heartache, and kind of letting the reader sit with that. And I don't necessarily know that I want to write a sequel. There's room to it. It's a very fun world. But there's also a piece of me that doesn't necessarily think the story itself has been told in every way it can be. I'm currently turning it into a play. I've toyed around with the idea of maybe making it a graphic novel. I think the story in its completion is finished, yet I don't think the lanes in which I can tell the story have been exhausted yet. When it was published, I sent a copy to my mom. And my mom's a huge reader. She hated the book. She was not a fan of the story at all. She loved the writing. She said it was very pretty and poetic and was very complimentary, but she was like, I don't know why it had to be so dark. But that's the kind of stories that I like. I like looking through or looking behind the curtain of what's really going on behind humanity's life. I think we all, as people, put on a face for the outside world. We go to work, we put a smile on our face. We're around our friend group, we're pretending to be okay. But behind closed doors, there's always some kind of trauma that we're dealing with, some kind of monkey on our back that we can't get rid of. And I love those gritty, real stories. So I think anybody that's into those kind of real, honest, gritty, truthful life stories would find this interesting. Preferably, they don't, like my mom, say they didn't like it. That would be horrible. Honestly, I think if someone told me that it affected them one way or the other, whether it was they were heartbroken by the ending, or they were brought back to a time when they were young and growing up with their friends, or they were disgusted by what happened, or I think any story that can touch a person in any regard is a success. I think the worst case scenario would be someone would just be ambivalent about the writing and was like, yeah, sure, and move on. I think that would be the worst case scenario. Delicate Little Things is the beginning. I started in screenplays. I've written a lot of shorts, a lot of features, a lot of pilots, and Delicate Little Things was the first thing that I kind of took ownership for, that I said, I haven't written anything for me. My grandmother growing up, my mom's mom, who the book is dedicated to, was a writer. And she was so terrified to ever send her writing out that when she passed, I got a briefcase full of, it must be like 6 to 8 novels that she had written and finished that she was too afraid to do anything with. And I think as I got older, I hit about 30 and I just thought, I tell myself that I want to do this. I want to be a storyteller. And yet I'm not sharing anything with the world. I'm just doing it for me, and it's very hidden. And I thought back to my grandmother, and I know that she would want me to share these stories. And so I just kind of took the plunge, and here we are. And I think it was a really beautiful place for me to start. It gave me a lot of courage. It taught me a lot of lessons, but it gave me this sensation and this strength and backbone to say that I'm more than capable of doing this, of telling the stories that I want to tell. I think it could continue. I don't necessarily know if I want it to continue yet. If it would continue, I don't think I would continue it in any other form outside of a novel. I don't think I would write a script for a sequel or anything like that, but it may be interesting to come back maybe a couple years later and see what the consequences are or aren't from the end of the book. But I do think that this story isn't finished living in other realms. I'm turning it into a play. I'm toying with the idea of a graphic novel. I think this story needs to live in other formats. I'm coming up with an audio drama of it as well. But a sequel itself, I'm not really sure if I've answered that question yet. You know, I think I just think I had never shared my writing with anybody before in this form. You know, I know there's a lot of forums, there's a lot of fan fiction out there, there's a lot of websites to share your writing, and I had just never really done that. And it was a really big step and a really big jump to publish it and get it out there. And you know, I think in the first month, it was like 20 or 25 copies that I sold, and just seeing people that were interested in it and interested in taking it and reading it really kind of opened my eyes to the fear that I had that was stopping me, and I think that's gone now. It's funny because I write such random genres. I'm working on my next novel right now, but it's a romantic comedy, a farce fairy tale. It has nothing to do with a suspenseful thriller at all. I think Delicate Little Things is a bit more true to what I like to read. I love Jack Reacher. I love Ray Bradbury. I love Michael Crichton. So I'm really into, you know, crime mysteries and thrillers and suspenseful stories. But I don't ever want to be someone that's kind of holed up into one genre. That's one of my favorite things about Stephen King is he's famous and known for his horror, but he has beautiful short stories. What is it? The Wonderful Life of Chuck, I think it's called. The Body, even though it is a little bit more gruesome, which is what Stand By Me became. But he has these kind of beautiful stories, even though he's known for it and, you know, all these other crazy horror films and horror novels. But I hope that people don't think that this is all, I'm a one-trick pony, this is all I can do. I don't necessarily know if it was the story that I needed to tell now. I think it was the act of telling a story that I needed to do now. I came to LA when I was 18. I came out here through Disney Channel. I kind of got a whirlwind of acceptance very quickly. Got an agent, a manager, started auditioning right off the bat for very big projects. Didn't book a whole lot, but booked some things. Joined SAG within the first 3 years I was here and was really moving along and was really excited about that as an actor. And it got to a point where every casting director that I was going in for was saying, you have a great career ahead of you. Really excited for all the things that are going to happen for you. And then social media picked up, and then the industry changed, and then I didn't hear from anybody. And there was a couple of years of really kind of hardcore depression of wondering why I was here and what I was doing, and understanding that I couldn't go back home. I'm not made to live a normal life. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but I grew up watching my parents work their jobs, and the thought of me doing that was just crippling. I couldn't fathom living that life. And I just kind of got to a point where I was writing silently to myself as just a way to kind of express this creative outlet. And I hit 30 and I thought back to that 18-year-old kid that came to LA. And my real goal when I moved out here was I want to tell stories with my friends. I didn't want to be, you know, the next Brad Pitt or the next George Clooney. I wanted to be the next Adam Sandler, the guy that's just working with his friends all the time and telling stories. And I realized that I can do that even through writing, even if it's just developing stories and novels with my friends and understanding characters and And there was nothing holding me back from being what I wanted to be except myself. And I think that's why I needed to tell the story now. My mom hated it, so that's fun. She loved the reading and the writing of it. She was not a fan of the story, not her cup of tea, which I kind of assumed it wouldn't be. My sister read it. She, again, loved the writing. Not necessarily something that she would read. It's very genre specific, but ironically, the actor that read for Will and was kind of helping me, develop the character, he got like his entire extended family to read it. His mom's book club read it. His dad read it. His cousins read. He got 30 people to read this book. I was so shocked and very honored and touched by it, but he said everybody loved it. I don't know if he was just being nice and sweet to me, but he was very adamant about, no, my family, they loved it. My mom's book club, they were amazed by it. And so it was really cool to kind of see that reaction. At the end of the book, I thank all of those actors and everybody that kind of really helped me develop this story and make this story come to life. And so all of their names are in the very last page of the book. And so it was really an honor for me to hear him share this story that he had such a personal touch on with his family. But yeah, so far I've been very honored by the positivity that I've gotten back from it. I haven't thought about that. I mean, best case scenario, Pulitzer Prize, lots of money, nationwide success. But realistically, I think it's just more, just do it. I know so many people who want to be writers. I'm kind of surrounded by a lot of them, and very few do it. Very few of them actually write. They read, they watch movies, they do this, they do that. They love to research writers and their lives, but the act of writing can seem very daunting. And I think if anything, whether you like the novel or not, I hope that if you read it, it makes you go, I want to do this. And I hope it makes you pick up a pen and paper. I hope it makes you pick up a computer. I hope it makes you realize that you can do it. Just do it. Just start. Just get it out there. Not everybody's going to like it. Some people are going to hate it. Art is subjective. But at least you did it. Oof, keep reading. There are so many beautiful writers out there that have a platform and have published books, but also some that don't. I have a friend who is obsessed with fan fiction, and he has these 2 or 3 websites that he goes onto, and he spends all night reading short stories of just people all over the world who've developed these fan fiction stories. And there's forums to share your writing. There's poetry forums. There's forums for, short stories, novels, series. If you love to read and you have a particular genre that you like, just look up any format of that genre you can. It's great to buy books and to support authors that are out there being published, but understand that a lot of those authors started out as people who were just sharing their stories online with their friends anywhere they could. So read everything, read often. Just keep loving to read. I think that Delicate Little Things, because it's my first, will always be one of those stories that I'm constantly redoing. I'll probably write 100 different versions of this. It will continue to grow, continue to change. hopefully each version of that teaches me some lesson, but I fell in love with writing. I'm halfway through my second novel right now. Totally different story. It's a romantic comedy. It has nothing to do with Delicate Little Things, but I think I got the bug, as they say it. I got a little taste of the life that I could have as a storyteller, and I think I've just gotten started. This has been a very rewarding experience for me, personally. I don't think I ever challenged myself to do something like this, and to see the support and the love and sometimes probably often more support than I deserve or needed, but it's been amazing, the response that I've been getting from this, and it's everything that I've ever wanted to do. And it's an ongoing journey of, you know, getting it into bookstores and getting into people's hands and sharing the story with other people and continuing to write. And I've got one novel that I've already started writing, but I've got a number of others that, you know, are outlined and ready to go that I'm excited to start on. And it's just been such an amazing journey doing this, and it's been eye-opening. I think there aren't enough people in the world who genuinely can say that they're doing exactly what they want to do. I know some people view that and they think, you know, living on the yacht, the mansion in the hills, because they're making money doing what they want to do, and I'm so drastically far from that. But just the knowledge and peace of heart to be able to say that I call myself a writer and I'm writing is so rewarding. And I thank you all for helping me achieve that and being a part of that journey and that experience, and I can't wait to continue to share more with you.
What was it again? Cool beans.
Cool beans.